Hello and welcome to my channel. I am Meg Lee from Creative Lee, and this is my favorite books of 2024 video. How this is structured is that I have picked 10 of my favorite books of the year and ranked them as best as I could. I also have, I think, 6 just honourable mentions that I won't go as deep into, but they can be potentially some good recommendations for you because we're all different and we all like different things. And so this is just a very personal list from my year of reading. This year has been very different for me when it comes to reading. I mean, I've always loved reading, but I've never read this many books, ever. And it's not even a crazy amount. I've read 50 books. I finished my 50th actually on a train ride on the way to a New Year's Eve party. Like, I was cutting it close. I got a little too confident because halfway through the year I was over halfway to 50, and the second half of the year things were different with my schedule and things, and so I didn't read as much. That is more than double what I would normally read. It was also my first year of being more organized with reading and just having it as a more in-depth hobby and a more purposeful hobby, I suppose. I don't know if I would read as much in 2025 because 2024 I wasn't able to work for most of the year for various reasons, and I was also coping with a lot of things going on, and so I went to reading to kind of focus on. It was quite a comfort and excited me as well. So before I get into my actual list, I did want to mention it's kind of awkward. I do have a poetry book for sale. I made this, let's see, I think I published this in 2019, but it's called How to Become New by Megan Ruth. That's my previous surname, but that's what it's still under. There are links in my description box of all my videos actually where you can purchase it. It is available on Amazon. It's also available in lots of other major bookstores, and I think you can also order it through a local bookstore with the ISBN number, and that is all down in the description box. It's kind of just poetry about finding yourself in your 20s, struggling with mental illness a little bit. Yeah, just various bits. They're all very short poems, and when I say short, I mean short. Don't know if you can see this very well. But if you do enjoy poetry from time to time, definitely check it out. If you want to support me, this is a really good way to support. And if nothing else, I personally think it is quite a pretty book to have. So once you read it, it's a quick read, but it's also nice to have around. I worked really hard on the design of it. Just needed to plug that because it's part of my job now. Anyway, okay. And this list comes from books that I have finished this year. I do have other books that I might be in the middle of, or I read just a little bit from time to time. But yeah, these are the books that I finished, of the books I finished in 2024 out of those 50. Top 10. Also, don't forget to subscribe. I'm trying to grow this channel as quickly as possible, and any subscriptions are greatly appreciated. Also, like and comment if you would like, and yeah, let's get started. So first off, I'll just start with the honorable mentions, and I won't go as deep into them, but you can maybe just use it as a starting off point of doing some book recommendation research if that's what you're after. The first one is Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe. I love this movie to death. It's a really good movie. So if you haven't seen the movie, I recommend that even more than the book. And that's probably why this is just an honorable mention, is because I know it's unpopular to say, but the movie was better than the book to me. And someone else might disagree, and that's fine. But that's just why it's an honorable mention for me. But you might like it even more, so I did want to mention it. Second honorable mention is The Book Thief. I never read this before. I think some people in my high school read it as part of the curriculum, but it was not a part of any of my English classes. So I'd never read it before. The writing is phenomenal. There are quotes that I would read aloud to my husband just because I appreciated them, and just the idea that the perspective is from death is just very unique. I'm not someone who enjoys World War II stories generally, but I knew it would be a good read nonetheless, so I did enjoy it to an extent. Obviously, it's just an objectively good book. The next one is A Psalm for the Wild-Built, which this one I think was very popular this year, so you'd probably see it lots of other places. And I did have a go at these. I think it was quite fun and quite obviously cozy is how it's usually described. It is more of a hopeful science fiction, and it's not very high stakes or intense. It's about a tea monk, and we don't know what planet it is on or when exactly it is, but it has to do with this cute little robot who's just a sweet little individual. If you want something low-key and cozy and a little out of the norm, I definitely recommend this. The next honourable mention is The Woman in the Purple Skirt. I feel like maybe one day I'll reread this. When I read it, I just was stuck in an airport and really sick. And so it was a really weird time to read it, and so my memory of it is not the fondest. And yeah, I do think of it as a top book of the year, even though I don't really remember that much about it. It was probably because I was feeling so sick and so delirious. It was very unique. It's a little creepy. It's about a woman who is following another woman who wears a purple skirt. So if you like a little bit of creepy, there it is. Next honourable mention, this one's a bit different. It's called East. This was a reread for me. It's more of a young adult book. It's kind of an older, early 2000s, maybe 2003, 2005. I was originally recommended this book by my librarian in my K-8 school. I just remember devouring it in like 8th grade. Years later, when I found this in a bookstore, maybe 10 years ago. It's very simple, like the writing style is extremely simple for younger readers, but it's not ever really cheesy, which I liked. It's really nice to read when you're trying to fall asleep because it kind of takes you to some nice serene places. It's good for winter time as well because it takes place in a variety of places, but like Norway, on the ocean, all the way to Greenland, and then even further up north. I should mention it's a Norwegian fairy tale retelling, so it has that kind of fairy tale feel to it. I talked a little bit more about that than I meant to, but I did really like this book. The next one, this is my last honourable mention. I probably have too many, but that's okay. So the last one is The Summer Book by Tove Jansson. I really love her writing style. I think that this one it was a little flat for me. It didn't, it was kind of a wandering, meandering sort of book. Each chapter was just kind of like a little glimpse into their life. It is quite beautiful. Obviously, I love this cover. I made sure I got the US version so that I could have this cover. If you like Tove Jansson, especially in the summertime, perfect time to pick it up. All right, now we're going to get into my actual top 10 books of 2024. Okay, so in my 10th place, it's kind of a random book and it's not for everyone. And it is, I only have 2 nonfiction books in here. So this is a nonfiction. It's called In the Blink of an Eye by Walter Murch. And the first part is taken from a talk he had. He is a quite successful film editor. He worked a lot with Francis Coppola, George Lucas, I believe. Yeah, so he worked a lot in that kind of new Hollywood era where the kind of old school Hollywood was moving out, and what we think of as the beginning of how Hollywood kind of is now was beginning, which is like the 70s, I suppose. And then onwards, he's had a long career. So this book would be for anyone interested in the film industry or just editing in general. It's not a technical book. Some parts are technical, but there's my favorite chapter is when he is explaining sort of the title of the book, In the Blink of an Eye, and comparing movies to dreaming and why editing works when we ourselves, up until the 20th century, we lived life without editing, and why does cutting film work to our minds when we're watching a movie? Why is there no dissonance there? Why? And so he kind of explains how blinking can kind of be a form of editing. It's very emotional. It's not necessarily just, you know, to keep your eyes wet. And so it was just a fascinating read. The only downfall is, well, there are two. And the reason why it's 10th place is because there's not much research that he's put behind this thing that he's noticed about blinking, or some of the cooler bits and points that he's mentioned in that chapter. He gave one or two sources, but they weren't extremely strong. So I would have loved a little bit more research done on that. But also the second problem I had, which is just natural, it needs another edition. It needs a third edition, because the second edition, which is the majority of the book, he's talking about digital editing and the difference between old school editing and digital. And he was writing it in like 2001. It was a good update for that point compared to when this was originally published in the 90s, but so much has changed, and it's still worth a read if you're interested in the 90s and early 2000s time of filmmaking. Like I said, this isn't for everyone for any interest, but if that's a particular interest of yours, it is so good. It's so, like, it's worth a read for sure. In 9th place, which I think almost everyone in the whole world knows about this book. It is The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. I actually took like 2 years to read this one. And it's not because it's so long. It's like 800 something pages. It's because I started it. I think I read the first half in 1 week, and then I didn't pick it up again for like over a year. And then the second half I read in like January, February this year, just in 1 week. Like, so I just read it in 2 weeks, but it took me like 2 years. But the funny thing is, when I picked it back up, I remembered most of it, and I was able to do that. It is the third Donna Tartt book that she's published, and it was the third one that I've read. It wasn't my favorite one. She's an amazing writer. Like, her writing style has been a big inspiration for me as a writer. She's really good. She's really good. The story itself, I don't know, it's just, I just felt very middling on it. It's about a boy named Theo Decker, where something tragic happens to he and his mom in New York City when he's 13, I think. And then he has to be taken under the wing by not so good adults and makes friends with someone who maybe isn't the best influence on him. It's quite dark. It's not the darkest thing I've read, but it was heavy. And that's why I had to pause on the book, was because with what was going on in my brain, I couldn't add this to what was already happening in my brain. If you are able to take a heavier sort of story, then it is really good. But yeah, I don't know why it was a little bit more middling than her other two books. In 8th place, in 7th place, I don't have the physical book, but it's called Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman, I think. Yes. Obviously, you've probably heard of this book, and all I've ever heard was that either they really liked the book or it was just kind of a bit flat for them. It's very different from the movie, but I've only seen the movie once, and it was like 4 years ago, 5 years ago. So I didn't have a lot to compare it to, and I felt kind of flat about the movie personally, and so I thought maybe the book would be the same way. But because it's so different, I highly recommend reading it whether you like the movie or not. I think what made me like this book so much is the writing style and the fact that there is magical realism involved. What I found out about myself this year in my reading is that I love books that have a bit of magical realism in them. And that term is tossed around quite a bit and not really explained, but I guess the way I might explain it is that there's an element of things happening that are a bit strange and wouldn't actually happen in real life, but the characters in the story consider it normal, or at least not like, it's not fantastical. if that makes sense. It's a part of their world. It's hard to explain. So the book is about these two sisters who grow up in New England with their aunts. They are orphans, and it follows them through their childhood, early adulthood, and I guess middle age? Yeah, approaching middle age or middle-aged. And one of the sisters has two daughters of her own. Yeah, it has a wider time range than the movie does. And it just kind of follows along their relationships and what it's like to grow up as a woman. Obviously the aunts seem to be witches for sure, but it's not really like your average witch story. It's kind of more subtle than that, which I liked. And it's the magic that you find with witches is more so put into the magical realism. I just found that fascinating how she did that. Something I do want to point out with this book is that it doesn't really feel like an October read. I read it in half of it in October, and then I ran out of time and I had to try and finish it in November, and so I listened to the audiobook the rest of it. Most of the book takes place in the summertime, and so I feel like because of that it would be a perfect book for the end of summer when you're starting to anticipate the beginning of autumn and you're getting excited about it, if you're that kind of person. It's perfect for that time. So if you're just beginning to get excited about autumn in 2025, pick up Practical Magic if you haven't read it yet. In sixth place is The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. I happened upon this book because I had bought it like over 10 years ago and it was sitting in my closet in my parents' house in another country. I just was there and I remembered that I used to own this, and had I given it away? Let me check. It was there. I felt like reading it and I loved it. It's not as profound as like Donna Tartt, but it's still really good writing, and it's very gothic and has a lot of good ambiance. It takes place in Yorkshire and Cambridge. It is about an author who is about to pass away. She wants someone to write her biography, and she's never told her story before. And so the main character is the person who is interviewing her and trying and learning about this author's quite mysterious upbringing. It's a little dark, a little spooky, but not extremely so at all. It's just it has mystery, and I love mystery. So that's something I already knew about my writing, or about my reading, is that I love mystery. Now to the top 5 books. Number 5, maybe don't take the ranking too seriously with this one because it's another nonfiction and it's completely different from just a novel. So I didn't really know where to put it, but I definitely felt like it was in my top 5 because it was very helpful to me this year. But this book is Tumbling Sky by Matt Searles. I actually don't know how to say his last name, but this is a psalm devotional book. So even though it's quite short, it's something that you take the time to get through. As a Christian, I really found this healing and comforting. It's perfect when you're having a hard time and it's hard to open the Bible, or when you're feeling depressed and it's really just sounds like a lot of work to read something. This is perfect for that. It's just got short glimpses into some psalms. Like here it says, "Gentle and wise, this outstanding devotional is balm for bruised souls." Like, balm for bruised souls is exactly how I would also describe this if I thought of those words. I know a lot of people who have found this helpful as well. So yeah, I highly recommend if you need a light devotional, or whether you're busy or just feeling low, it's just a very easy to digest little devotional. It's perfect for taking just a little bit at a time. Yeah, very friendly, very kind, very loving devotional. And then in 4th place we have dun, 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 Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I have a reading vlog on my channel. If you haven't read that, if you haven't watched that, and you are interested in reading, then that might be a fun watch. I won't talk about this a ton because I do talk about it so much in that video. It's like one of my, I think it is my longest video, but I'll briefly just sum it up, it's about Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. Obviously, they are magicians. It takes place during the Napoleonic War in early 1800s Regency era. Magic has disappeared from England, or so it seems. There are magicians, but they are theoretical magicians. So they study previous magicians' work from centuries ago. These two magicians are the two actual practicing magicians of their time, and they have quite a large influence. It's very historical, also fantastical, a bit of both of those worlds. And I just love the idea that England used to have magic, because if you ever come to England or live in England, it definitely has that feeling, like more places than others, but definitely in just like the natural countryside or in, you know, the beautiful architecture that you can find. It feels like there could have been magic here hundreds of years ago. I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case. Yeah, it's just fun to think about, and I just love Susanna Clarke's imagination. So highly recommend this book. It's a commitment, but it's worth the commitment. So if you feel like you're ready for it, go for it. In third place, I was surprised by this, but it stuck in my head more than I thought it would. And that is Convenience Store Woman. It's a very quick read, so you could read it opposite of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. Like, I don't know how I put this on 3 and that's on 4, but this one is about a sales clerk at a convenience store. She started working there when she was a young adult, and in her 30s she's still working there, and she's not married, doesn't have kids, isn't pursuing the career that her family and friends think she's supposed to, or pursuing marriage, but she's completely content. So she's struggling with this conflict between what she is content with and what other people want her to be doing. It's not actually mentioned, but I'm pretty sure the main character is on the autistic spectrum, so finds the convenience store just really familiar, and the conversations are repetitive, and she knows what to say and when to say it, especially after so many years. If you have worked in retail, you know that you have the same conversation 50 times a day. But yeah, it gets a little weird. So if you like weird, then this is definitely worth a try. All right, in second place, this is also a reread. I decided to keep my rereads in here because my channel's new, so you haven't heard me talk about them before anyway. And I had 2 more spaces left, and I had 2 rereads that would have been on there if they weren't rereads. So this one is called Poppy and Dingen by Ben Rice. I read this a couple years ago. I had seen the movie as a kid called Opal Dream, and I enjoyed it then, but then when I reread this, it's just so good on its own, and then after rewatching the movie, the book's better than the movie. It's actually a novella, officially, so you could also read this in just one day, 1 or 2 days. It also has magical realism in it, which is partly why I love it. Another reason is something else I found out about myself this year is when it comes to reading is that I love it when things or people disappear. Has to do with the mystery element, I guess. And this is about a little girl who has 2 imaginary friends named Poppy and Dingen, and they disappear, and she becomes sick. It takes place in a mining town in Australia, in New South Wales. Her dad mines for opals, and opals are my favorite, like, stone, jewelry, stone, I guess. It's written quite simply, but with a little punch and cleverness in it. And because it's a novella, it's that perfect length for the story that's being told. It's clean, it's got nothing, no extra fluffy scenes that don't need to be there. But it also doesn't just leave you hanging. It just, everything is there that you need and nothing more. And so it's just a clean story in that way, like just very tidy. Oh, I just love this so much. Like, it is one of my favorite books. If you watched my reading vlog, then this is no surprise to you. And since then, I didn't read a book that topped this. It can't be done. So this is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, the same author as Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. This is my favorite like novel I've ever read, and I don't know when that will be topped, if ever. It's a 6-star read. I realized because I read it in like March, and I was having a hard time giving anything a 5-star because this was a 5-star to me, and I was like, it's not anywhere on this level, so why give it a 5-star? But I realized that this is an outlier. It's 6 stars. It's like above. So this is quite mysterious. It's about Piranesi. At least that's what he's called by someone named the Other. So he and the Other are the only people he knows of. He lives in a giant house that is endless, has endless corridors and endless gorgeous statues, and there are tides that come up and down different hallways that he takes notes of. The top floor is sometimes in the clouds. It's some places are in ruins, some are not, and he doesn't know what the house is or how he got there or if he was somewhere else before, but he writes in journals constantly. I think this is his journal. It's the mood, it's the mystery, it's the setting. It just does something to me. I can't describe it. It runs deep. But it says on the back, Piranesi lives in the house, which is capital H. Perhaps he always has. The messages begin to appear, scratched out in chalk on the pavements. There is someone new in the house, but who are they and what do they want? Lost texts must be found, secrets must be uncovered. The world that Piranesi thought he knew is becoming strange and dangerous. The beauty of the house is immeasurable, its kindness infinite. And the words beauty and kindness are capitalized as well. If you like The Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis, some people have described it as like an adult's version of The Magician's Nephew. It doesn't have any like links to Christianity, I don't believe, but it has that same sense of wonder. Like The Magician's Nephew is my favorite Narnia book that I've read. Still need to finish those. It's got that what if element, or like that. I think it was inspired a lot by Charn, which is where the witch came from. Obviously it's inspired by the artist Piranesi and his kind of illustrations of or sketchings of sort of endless staircases and things. It's also, I like to describe it as like, it's got that thing about it that you get with like if you read a mystery or thriller but with class, but it's got that page turning element that you get in a mystery where the second half you're just like, I gotta know what's going on. I could just go on and on about this thing. Please read it. It's so good. And it's not that long. Like, so that is number 1 of 2024. Well, that is my top 10 books of 2024. I am excited to continue reading this year. It won't be quite as many, but I will definitely be enjoying a good read from time to time. As I mentioned before, I have links in the description box that will lead to places where you can find my own poetry book. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And I wanted to remind you that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. I hope you enjoy the beginning of 2025. I'll see you next time. Bye.